So, what just happened on Super Tuesday? The story starts a couple days beforehand at the South Carolina primary. The South Carolina primary is seen as one of the first opportunities in which a large amount of African Americans get to show who they support in the Democratic primary, as South Carolina is a state with a large black population and a lot of black voters in the Democratic Party. Leading up to it, it looked like Joe Biden would be the favorite, but it was also kind of Joe Biden's last stand. He had taken a pretty bad loss in many of the other states that had proceeded before that, from Iowa to New Hampshire to Nevada, and it really wasn't looking good for him. It's weird because usually when vice presidents run for the presidential primary in their party, they're seen as the favorite, and Biden was seen as the favorite for some time, but then Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders then all had their own surges. And Bernie Sanders was able to have his surge happen just before voting, so he could hopefully ride that surge through Super Tuesday, get a lot of the states that were at play, get a lot of their delegates, and then cruise toward the nomination. But it was never going to be that easy for Bernie. The South Carolina primaries happen, and Joe Biden finally gets his first win in the state ever. Like, he's run for president 3 times over the past 30 years or so, and has never actually won a single state until South Carolina primary happened on February 29th. That's incredible. Bernie came in second, a very far away second, and it was very clear to those in the race that there were 2 different races happening. The race for the centrist frontrunner and the race for the progressive frontrunner, within the Democratic Party, of course. And so something interesting happened. Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, and then Beto O'Rourke all showed up together at a rally in Texas, one of the states voting in Super Tuesday, for Joe Biden. Both Amy and Pete were there because they decided to end their campaigns after lackluster performances in South Carolina and not having a viable path forward in more diverse states than they had previously been running in. So all 3 of these candidates come together and urge their supporters to vote for Joe Biden. Why? Because Joe Biden is the candidate who appeals most closely to the moderate of the Democratic Party, as did Amy Klobuchar, as did Pete Buttigieg, as did Beto O'Rourke. Even though Pete and Beto tried to talk about how they were radicals and they were trying to change things from the inside out and be a young grassroots movement, that was all talk. That was all incredibly cheap talk. And it was very clear in the other cheap talk they had later on in their campaigns whose side they were on. So we go into Super Tuesday with Michael Bloomberg, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Tulsi Gabbard. And they're all competing for votes and delegates. Tulsi Gabbard got one from American Samoa. Michael Bloomberg got one also from American Samoa. And Michael Bloomberg got a bunch of delegates, and by a bunch I mean a little less than 12 at time of recording. He spent $500 million to get 12 delegates. ROI my ass. But the triple threat of the Beto, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar endorsements worked really well in Biden's favor. Biden took a lot of the states in the Democratic Party that voted on Super Tuesday, especially the southern ones. He was very competitive in the other races up north, like Maine and Massachusetts especially. And then once he started going out west to Texas, to California, to Colorado, then Bernie had a little bit more of a strong suit, thankfully in those states, because those states had more of the delegates to give. But it seemed like Biden would win Texas, kind of a close second would be Sanders, and then Sanders would take away California and Colorado, along with some other smaller states like Utah that are voting later in the West. So that brings us to today. Michael Bloomberg now realizes that he is not a viable moderate candidate, and he is moved over to Team Biden. He dropped out of his race and endorsed Biden just the other day. So, where does that put us? We now have the entire moderate of the Democratic Party coalescing around Joe Biden and his failure campaign that he's not going to win, and they're all united to say Joe Biden's going to be the nominee, all of his faults be damned, the Democratic Party establishment wants this, even though many in the popular vote and many people on Bernie Sanders' side do not want this. And in the middle is Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren, who has not performed particularly well in any of the states leading up to Super Tuesday, did not perform very well in the states that took place in Super Tuesday. It's even looking like she's going to come 3rd place in her home state of Massachusetts. There was no home court advantage for her. She lost. And it's terrible because Elizabeth Warren actually did run a pretty good campaign. It was the second most progressive campaign that was being run, built on a whole cavalcade of ideas that policy wonks on the left loved and really wanted to see more of. But the campaign also got to Warren as well. She started making attacks against Sanders, some justified, some not, and she positioned herself as the other progressive candidate in the race. More so, she asserted herself, which she's running a campaign. That's every right of hers to do. But what does that mean for the math? It means that if you're a moderate Democratic voter, you have one option, and that's Joe Biden. It means if you're a progressive Democratic voter, it means you have two options, Warren and Bernie. And what happens when two people split one voting sector is that the other sector wins. This is why you don't run third-party campaigns in our political system, because that third party usually splits the vote from one of the other parties, leaving one party the victor. Some of these things are just math, and it's sad. But where do we go from here? Both she and Sanders have pioneered progressive policies in the Democratic race this time around. They both pioneered raising the minimum wage. They both pioneered wealth taxes. They both pioneered debt forgiveness for student loans to different degrees. They both pioneered universal single-payer healthcare, again, to varying degrees. But those two, I'm talking about Sanders and Warren, are candidates that don't have any real parallel within the Democratic Party, especially not now with a Biden versus Sanders race. So with Warren and her somewhat notable, but barely enough to even get viability in many states, number of delegates, and her vast support, has a very difficult decision to make here. Is your campaign viable, or is it time to throw your support behind Sanders? And I would say if you're Elizabeth Warren and you want the best possibility for your extremely progressive agenda that will be good for this country to pass, then you probably need to endorse Bernie Sanders and encourage all of your supporters to vote for him in the upcoming states. Otherwise, the rising gap between the rich and the poor, the climate crisis, wars that we may or may not be having, outbreaks of disease that we really need universal healthcare systems for, all the stuff that Warren is trying to be a fighter for is at stake if she doesn't get strategic. Look, I've been a Sanders-Warren split ticket guy for a while now, and I'm going to double down right now. I think this is the only path forward. Because if Sanders does not win the Democratic primary, and if he doesn't have a strong argument going into what looks like it might be a contested convention, then we're going to end up talking about Ukraine and Joe Biden's son until Trump gets very easily reelected, and then the country's gone. So, your move, Warren. Hope you make the right choice. If you like this video, let me know, and I might post more like this. This is kind of an impromptu video update thing. I wanted to post and see if it got out there, but thank you for watching.